In 1821, the heir to this castle was officially declared dead at birth, and then walled up alive in a secret room to hide his deformity from the world. He did not die. He lived there his entire life. Each successive heir, on his 21st birthday, would learn the terrible truth. They were shown the bricked-up door, behind which their older brother was still living. You may have held this castle in your hands without even knowing it. Today, it is printed on Scottish banknotes as a symbol of greatness. But we will show you how this place was a machine for producing tragedies for centuries, and how its perfect facade conceals the most terrible sin of the aristocracy. And we will start at the very beginning, with a contract that the dynasty's founder signed 650 years ago. A contract that seems to have been sealed with more than just ink. They glide across the parquet floor in comfortable shoes, their whispers drowning in the echoing space. In their ears, the sterile voice of an audio guide recounts someone else's sanitized pain. They look, but do not see. They listen, but do not hear. For them, this is just a stop on a tour, a collection of dates and names. The camera turns away from them. It leaves them alone with their digital guides. We drift through the cold, still air in which the scent of wax and dust is mixed with the faintest note of fear. We look at what remains when the living are gone. Portraits. Their eyes, forever frozen in oil, watch not the tourists, but time itself. They have seen everything. The birth of heirs and the agony of old men, wedding vows and death rattles. They are silent with the arrogance of those who know how every story ends. What does the stone hear when the people leave? It hears the dust settling on a gilded frame. It hears the old wood breathe, contracting from the night's chill. It hears a floorboard creak under the weight of something that is not there. This is the memory of the house, its own non-human consciousness. Look at the walls. 5 meters of stone, 5 meters of compressed fear, designed to shut out the world, or to keep something in, to muffle a scream that was never meant to escape. And now, the windows. 48 windows, bricked up. 48 blind eyes, walled into the facade for the sake of a dead symmetry. Architecture lies. It creates the illusion of order, where the chaos of madness reigns. The house pretends it is whole, but its body is covered in scars. It is quiet here, but this is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a predator lying in wait. It is the silence of a prison after a riot. Every sound here is an intruder. Your footsteps, your breath. The house tolerates you, but it is waiting for you to leave. Because when the noise of the day fades, the true masters awaken. They say it is cold here even in summer, a sudden icy draft in a room where all the doors are closed. That's her, the Gray Lady, a spirit who refused to leave the site of her humiliation. But she had a name, Janet Douglas, a name the king tried to erase with fire. She was accused of witchcraft. Her servants were tortured. Her son was forced to watch as the flames devoured his mother. And now she is here, not seeking revenge, not trying to frighten, simply walking through the chapel where she prayed for salvation, through the corridors where she was seized. She is not just a legend sold in the gift shop. She is the original sin of this house, a living reminder that the foundation of this grandeur is mixed with the ashes of a burned woman. So what is this place? A monument to a dynasty, carved from pride? Or is it a mausoleum where, for centuries, they buried not only the dead, but the living? A fortress built for glory, or the most expensive prison in the history of Scotland, where each owner became its next prisoner. Before the first stone was laid, there was mud. the cold, thick mud of Scotland, smelling of peat and blood. And there was ambition, the naked, predatory ambition in the eyes of a young man named John Lyon. He was not born to rule. He was a courtier, a man whose chief weapons were the king's ear and a word spoken at the right time. He breathed the air of intrigue, where loyalty was not a virtue, but the hardest currency. King Robert II, aging and weary, saw in him not a friend, but a useful tool, and for good service, tools must be rewarded. The year is 1372. The king grants Sir John the lands of Glamis. This was not a purchase, it was a payment. Payment for loyalty, for silence, for the readiness to do what is not written in the chronicles. On paper, a generous gift. In reality, a golden collar. Lyon was now bound to the crown by an invisible chain. But land is only the beginning. Land without status is just clay. Lyon looked at these misty hills and saw not a hunting lodge, but the embryo of a dynasty. He knew that true greatness required blood, not the kind shed in battle, but the kind that flows in the veins of kings. The year is 1376, the deal of the century. Sir John Lyon marries Princess Joanna, his patron's daughter. This is not love. It is a merger of assets, his cunning and her lineage, his thirst for power and her royal DNA. The wedding vows sounded like clauses in a contract. Her hand in his was a seal on a document that transferred the rights to the future. Now his children would be the grandchildren of a king. Their legitimacy would be carved in stone. That is when the real construction began. Not of walls, but of power. Every stone that would be laid in the foundation of the future castle would be paid for. Paid not with gold, but with lives. The lives of nameless peasants who now belonged to him. Their crops, their livestock, their sons who would be taken to war. All of it became his rent. The tribute they paid for the right to breathe on Lyon's land. Their backs were the foundation upon which the stone would rise. Their sweat was the mortar that bound the walls. But when you drink from the king's cup, you make enemies. Lyon's influence grew. His proximity to the throne began to provoke envy, and in the 14th century, envy smelled of steel. The man who gained everything by the word met his end by the sword. The year is 1382. A duel. A dispute over land and power with the king's nephew. The clash of blades in the morning mist. A short, furious dance of death. The blood of the dynasty's founder soaks into the very land he so craved. He got everything he dreamed of, and he paid for it with his life. The first foundation stone of Glamis has not yet been laid, but it has already been washed with blood, not an enemy's, but his own. This is the first payment on an account this house will be settling for centuries. The contract with the crown was signed, and like any contract with a diabolical power, it was written in ink and sealed with blood. The 17th century. A century when titles could be bought, but respect never could. This was the air that Patrick Lyon, the first Earl of Kinghorn, breathed. Earl. The word rolled off the tongue like a gold coin, and it cost no less. He paid the crown a fortune for the right to add that word to his name. Now he was not just a lord, he was an earl. But every morning he would wake up and look out the window, and the stone would answer him with contemptuous silence. Glamis was an old warrior, rough, scarred by sieges, smelling of damp and steel. It was a fortress, built for survival, not for admiration. Its thick walls spoke not of wealth, but of fear. Its small, arrow-slit windows squinted at the world with eternal suspicion. This castle was a reflection of his ancestors, stern, pragmatic, with no taste for elegance. And Patrick hated it. He hated its honesty, its barbaric directness. This castle was a living reproach, a reminder of who he was, not who he so desperately wanted to appear to be. His gaze was fixed south, towards France, to where stone didn't frown, but sang, where castles didn't defend, but soared, where architecture was not a necessity, but an art. He saw the slender, graceful chateaux of the Loire Valley, their reflections trembling in the sleepy rivers. That is what his soul craved. Not a fortress, but a backdrop. Not a refuge, but a stage for triumph. And so he began a war. A war not with an enemy clan, but with his own heritage. The sound of a hammer shattering old masonry was music to his ears. He ordered Glamis to be rebuilt, to break its will, to dress the old warrior in the silk clothes of a courtier. And so they began to rise above the rough, thick walls. The turrets, pointed like the needles of a syringe, injecting vanity into the veins of the old castle. Dozens of turrets, reaching for the gray Scottish sky. But it was a deception, an architectural lie. These turrets served no defensive purpose. They had no arrow slits for archers. No garrison could take shelter in them. Their staircases were too narrow, their walls too thin. Their only function was to be seen. Their only purpose was to scratch at the sky, declaring the owner's status to everyone who passed by. This was pure propaganda, frozen in sandstone. Every turret was a cry from his ego, a silent scream. Look at me. I am not just a Scottish lord with a sword who smells of sheep's wool. I am a European aristocrat with taste. I am the equal of French dukes. Glamis ceased to be a fortress. It became a statement. The stone learned to lie. It told a story not of strength, but of a desperate desire to appear strong. Beneath the elegant skin of a French chateau, the coarse, barbaric heart of a Scottish fort still beat. And Patrick Lyon, looking at his creation, perhaps felt for the first time in his life that his home finally reflected him. A grand, impressive facade, behind which hid the same cold fear of not being good enough. The late 17th century, the Civil War had left rotting wounds on the body of Scotland. Greatness was trampled into the mud. Honor became a commodity. In a cold room of a castle that resembled a wounded beast, a man sits, not a dreamer, not a poseur. He is Patrick Lyon, the third Earl, a pragmatist to the bone. He looks upon the legacy of his ancestors and sees chaos, ruin, humiliation. Before him lies a book, thick, leather-bound. Its pages smell not of antiquity, but of sober calculation. This is his weapon, his gospel. The book of records. He bends over the parchment, and the scratching of his quill is the only sound breaking the deathly silence of the room, which smells of cold soot, congealed wax, and the iron of ink. He is not writing poetry. He is waging a war, and this is his book of orders. On these pages, the great construction is not a creative act, but a military campaign. Every line is a dispatch from the front. For the roof, 3,600 Scots pounds paid, a sum that could buy a small estate. Here, it is but a line in a report. His enemies are not men. His enemy is reality itself. He fights the weather, which washes away mortar and brings down scaffolding. He fights the unyielding stone that crumbles under the chisel. And the main enemy is the budget, melting away like snow in the spring sun. He is obsessed with the idea of restoring greatness, of washing away the shame of defeat with the gleam of a new facade. He believes that if he records every nail, every shilling spent, he can subdue chaos, impose order, force the stone to serve his will. But in his neat, almost calligraphic columns of figures, there is one, the most important, that he will never write down. the human cost. Behind every number in his book stand shadows, dozens of workers, masons, carpenters, laborers, their sweat mixed with the lime, their blood with the mud. When the scaffolding collapsed, when a stone broke free from a winch, their names were not entered into the book of records. They were simply replaced. The nameless soldiers of this war for prestige. Their names erased. Their suffering not accounted for in the budget. Patrick Lyon believed he was writing a chronicle of rebirth, that every page brought him closer to triumph. He did not understand that he was, in fact, composing the most detailed confession of bankruptcy in history. He did not know that every coin he meticulously recorded in his ledger was not a step towards greatness, but a step towards the abyss. That the splendor he was restoring to these walls was bought on credit from the future. He thought he was creating a monument, but in reality, line by line, he was writing a will by which his descendants would inherit not glory, but bills, not a castle, but a magnificent, stone-clad debtor's prison. The 19th century. The empire is at the height of its power, and Glamis is its small, perfect diamond. Silk rustles across the parquet floor, polished to a gleam. The light of 100 candles reflects in glasses of French wine. Laughter, like the chime of shattered crystal, floats beneath the painted ceilings. On the outside, the perfect facade of aristocratic life. Balls, hunts, visits from the nobility. The house plays its part flawlessly. It is a golden cage, and the birds within sing sweetly and loudly, so no one hears the bars rusting. But inside, there is rot. The air is thick with the scent of perfume and hypocrisy. Beneath the gilding on the walls, the mold of a family secret seeps through. The castle is at the peak of its magnificence, and at the bottom of its fall. The year is 1821. The castle awaits an heir, awaits the continuation of the line, another link in the flawless chain. And then the cry of a newborn is heard. But it is not a cry of triumph. It is a cry that makes the blood run cold. The father enters the room, which smells of blood and fear, and he sees not a son, but something for which there was no name in polite society, an error of nature, an insult to pure blood, a horrifying, unthinkable parody of a man. And in that moment, the family makes a choice, not between life and death, but between honor and truth. Reputation was the deity they worshipped, and this deity required a sacrifice. A short entry in the church register. Died at birth. A few letters of condolence. Somber faces in public. The performance was complete. And meanwhile, in the most remote part of the castle, masons were at their work. The scrape of a trowel against stone. A cold sound, with a breath of the grave about it. They were walling up a doorway, not to a cellar, not to a storeroom. They were walling up the door to a room where a living child was, the heir of Glamis, Thomas, the last stone, mortar, silence. The walls, 5 meters thick, obediently accepted him. They were built to keep enemies out. Now their sole purpose was to keep a secret in. The castle became his sarcophagus, a living sarcophagus, his cradle and his mausoleum. But the secret did not die. It lived on. It turned into a curse. When the heir reached his 21st birthday, his father would lead him to the locked room. By the light of a single candle, as the shadows on the walls grew long and grotesque, the father would tell his son, not a legend, but the truth, about his older brother, the one who still lived behind that wall. It was an initiation, not into power, but into horror. Young men entered that room as boys and emerged as old men. The secret poisoned everyone it touched. It could be read in their eyes, in the way they flinched at the creak of a floorboard, in how they avoided looking at certain walls in their own home. The house was no longer a fortress, protecting them from the outside world. It had become a trap that held the most dreadful thing inside, their own sin, made flesh. His quiet cries, which no one was meant to hear, became the beating heart of this cursed house. The mid-18th century. The gilding on the walls of Glamis has tarnished. The tapestries have faded. It is not the ghost of the Grey Lady that haunts the corridors, but the ghost of bankruptcy. It is far more terrifying. Its icy breath is felt in every unpaid bill, in every horse sold at auction, in every creditor's glance. The old money was gone. The extravagance of ancestors, lost political battles, Jacobite sympathies, all had presented their bill. The greatness of the dynasty, built on royal favor and peasant labor, was insolvent. The castle, this stone titan, was slowly starving to death. And then, in the hour of desperation, salvation glimmered on the horizon. Not from Scotland, not from the king. Salvation came from the south, from England. And it had a name: Mary Eleanor Bowes. She was not a princess. She was richer than any princess, the most eligible, wealthiest heiress in all of Britain. Her fortune did not smell of earth, heather, and old money. It smelled different, sharp, acrid. It smelled of smoke and sulfur. It smelled of coal. Her money was new, industrial, dirty, dug from the dark, damp bowels of County Durham, earned on the coughs and black dust in the lungs of thousands of nameless miners. Every pound sterling in her inheritance was marked with an invisible fingerprint of soot. For John Lyon, the 9th Earl, this was the only chance. He did not see a woman in her. He saw a lifeline, a mega deal that could save the walls of Glamis. The year is 1767. A wedding. A union of blue blood and coal dust. The ancient aristocratic family, whose pride was its only remaining capital, was making a deal with the new, ruthless power of the industrial world. But this deal had a price, a humiliating price. Under the terms of the marriage contract, to gain access to her fortune, £1,040,000 sterling, he had to give up a part of himself. He had to kill his own name, Lyon, the name his ancestors had borne for 600 years, a name for which men had died in duels, a name carved into the stones of the castle. Now it had to yield, to move aside. He became Bowes Lyon, a hyphenated name, the sound of compromise, the sound of a sale. On the day he put his signature to that contract, the walls of Glamis were saved. Coal money flowed north, patching the cracks in the facade, buying new carpets, filling the wine cellars. The castle could breathe freely again, but the soul of the dynasty, the soul was sold. The old aristocracy, in order to survive, had gotten into bed with the industrial age. And this marriage, this union of pure calculation, changed the family's blood forever. Now, in their veins, flowed not only the royal blood of the Stuarts, but also the eternal, unwashable dust of coal. The price of survival, the 20th century, a century of machines, world wars, and dying empires. The roar of engines drowned out the clatter of hooves. The world had changed, but Glamis had not. It was frozen in time, like a prehistoric insect in amber, majestic, beautiful, and utterly useless. It was no longer a center of power. Politics were decided not in its halls, but in the smoke-filled offices of London. It was no longer a fortress. An artillery shell would have turned its 5-meter-thick walls to dust in minutes. It had become a relic, an expensive, impractical burden from the past. The agony was long and noble. 1916. A telegram arrives from France. Fergus Bowes Lyon, the elder brother of the future Queen Mother, the heir, was killed in the Battle of Luz. His blood soaked not into his native soil, but into foreign mud, churned by shell craters. The first crack ran through the very heart of the family. Then came the Second World War. The castle, accustomed to the rustle of silk, now heard the groans of the wounded. Its ballrooms, which had seen queens, were turned into hospital wards. Aristocracy gave way to pain. Grandeur was worn down, stained with blood and carbolic acid. But the castle had one last, most valuable asset. Not land, not titles, but history, a myth. It was then that she entered the stage. Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, the girl who once slid down the main staircase on tea trays. Now, a queen. She made a brilliant move. She didn't try to hide the anachronism of her origins. She turned it into a weapon. In her stories, Glamis ceased to be a gloomy fortress with terrible secrets. It became an idyllic childhood home, a place from a fairy tale, bathed in sunlight, filled with laughter. This image, circulated by newspapers and newsreels, became a powerful PR tool. It connected the new, shaken monarchy with the ancient, romantic roots of Scotland. Glamis became the backdrop in her personal play. But even royal PR wasn't enough to pay the heating bills for 100 rooms. The war was over, the world was different, and the aristocracy faced its final, most terrifying enemy: necessity. And so they did what had been considered unthinkable for centuries, something that neither enemy armies nor royal confiscations had managed to do. They opened the gates, not to guests, but to customers. They began to sell what their ancestors had hidden at the cost of blood and honor. They began to sell their secrets, their tragedies, their ghosts. The Grey Lady, burned at the stake. Earl Beardy, playing cards with the devil. And even the whisper of the monster in the wall. It all became a commodity. Legends that once made the heir's blood run cold were now neatly packaged in tourist brochures. The family skeletons were taken out of the closets, dusted off, and put on public display for a few pounds a head. The house was not plundered by enemies with swords and battering rams. It was plundered by the quiet, merciless force of economic necessity. Every ticket sold was a small humiliation. Every camera flash in an ancient bedroom, an act of desecration. The castle survived, but the price was high. It ceased to be a home. It became an attraction. The present day. The air in Glamis no longer smells of fear. It smells of money, of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe in the old stables, and expensive perfume in the gift shop. The machine runs flawlessly. Glamis Castle is no longer a name, but a brand. A successful commercial enterprise with an annual turnover and a marketing strategy. Its profile, so recognizable, so gothic, is printed on the 10-pound note. A national treasure, a symbol of Scotland. It looks at you from your wallet, silent and proud. In its halls, where the fates of clans were once decided, they now decide which catering to choose for a Japanese millionaire's wedding. They hold corporate events here, team-building exercises. Managers in expensive suits drink champagne where Jacobites once drank their oath-swearing wine. The current owners, the 19th Earls, give interviews. With a polite, rehearsed smile, they officially deny their home's darkest legend. The monster of Glamis? Oh, that's just a 19th century invention, a fun Gothic tale. They say this, knowing full well that it's this very tale, this whisper of a horror sealed within the walls, that sells 90% of the tickets. They sell something that, by their own account, never existed. Brilliant business. So what is left? What remains of hundreds of years of ambition, cruelty, suffering, and pride? Stone is left. Stone turned into a commodity. Ghosts are left, now part of the show. Tragedy is left, Now with a price tag. All this titanic effort, all this spilled blood, all these lives laid on the altar of a dynasty. This entire desperate struggle to leave a mark on history, to leave something eternal. Where did it lead? Final shot. The gift shop, the bright, merciless light of fluorescent lamps. A tourist, tired from the long tour, pays with a credit card. He buys a small, shiny plastic model of the castle, made in China. The cashier puts it in a rustling paper bag. There it is, the grand dream of eternity, fitting in the palm of a hand, light, empty inside. Time's verdict has been delivered. It is final and cannot be appealed. Any tragedy over time becomes a commodity. Any eternity, in the end, becomes a souvenir. We have traced the journey of this stone, from a foundation mixed with blood and ambition to a facade hiding an unspeakable sin. We have seen how greatness, unable to pay its bills, turned into a backdrop and tragedy into an attraction. And if this is time's verdict for walls held together by the blood of kings and the tears of prisoners, then what is any of our own attempts to leave a mark ultimately worth? Is all eternity doomed to become a souvenir? It's a complex question, and there is no single right answer. That's why we'd be glad to see your opinion in the comments. If stories like this make you think, please support our channel. It helps us continue to tell them.